Before we begin, I want to thank Yehuda Boltzhauser here in Yerushalayim and Avram Klugman and the leadership of the shul in Baltimore for making this possible. I truly wanted that we should be together celebrating Tisha B'Av as the Yom Tov of Geula in Yerushalayim, and otherwise to be able to be physically together due to circumstances that was not possible. I appreciate it being made virtually possible. We are marking Tisha B'Av this year in unusual times, in times where the feeling of threat and of churban and of some level of pain and destruction is very real, current, and acute. The Jewish people are at war for Eretz Yisroel, and over the past few weeks there have been virtually every day funerals of young men who have died in defending Klal Yisrael and Eretz Yisroel. And so, in a sense, the sense of Tisha B'Av, the sense of mourning and destruction, is very real and present. And at the same time, unusually, many refer to this as a very special and positive time for the Jewish people. Yesterday, Mindy and I visited in Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, a hospital which is the closest hospital to Gaza and has handled more than 1,000 casualties, injuries, and worse from the Gaza war. And what we heard from the director of the hospital, from soldiers, from their families, from wounded soldiers, from their families, from active soldiers, from other people working in the hospital, is ze mamash kef, that it is a joy to be serving Klal Yisrael and to be part of the Jewish people at this time. Because with all of the korbanos, with all of the sacrifices, the Jewish people have come together in a way that no one can remember, that no one can recall. The director of the hospital, who's been around for a while, not a very young man, said that he thinks that this is perhaps the most glorious chapter in the history of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisroel. And in a certain sense, perhaps it is something which we can see wherever we are with this tremendous sense of togetherness. I can tell you that over the past 20 years or so, I've had numerous opportunities at different times to visit wounded soldiers in the hospitals, and never was there anything that approached the level of involvement and engagement of so many people and so many services and taking care of and showing interest in the soldiers as there is right now. And so, in a certain sense, this time of churban, this time of difficulty, of challenge, of loss of life, also has with it this ironic strength that the Jewish people are deriving from it. And so tonight, when we're going to focus here in the discussions about Eichah on the current situation, that's going to be the feeling, that ironic combination of the difficulty and at the same time as the strength that we will speak of. The overwhelming feeling from Perak Aleph of Eichah is of the loneliness and the isolation of Yerushalayim, of Eretz Yisroel. How does it sit alone, the city which was once so filled with people? It will cry at night, with its tears upon its cheeks. None of its lovers, none of its friends are there to console it. A sense of isolation. The Gemara says that when it uses the double expression, Bachai Sivke, cry, she will cry, it refers to the kinds of tears which are sounded at night, when everything is quiet and somebody hears someone weeping. So that is bocha umavaka acheres ima. Usually, that brings other people to cry when you hear the sounds of somebody weeping. There are certain kinds of tears that would engender sympathy, that would get others to join and to feel the same way. And what I think all of us are occupied with to some degree as we go through this period of the past more than a month of difficulty is as we look around and we have a sense of the tears, the difficulty beginning with the abduction of the 3 young men and through the raining of the missiles and this battle that has to be fought, where we feel that our tears, our difficulties are one which others should join in. And yet at the same time we look and we study and we read the press, we listen carefully to announcements of the State Department or the White House or the United Nations or other countries, and very often we feel Ein lo menachem mikol haveha. We're grateful, we're deeply grateful when we hear the expressions of support from the United States and from others, but so often it feels like this tremendous isolation. There's no one to comfort her from all those who loved her. Eicha yoshva vadad ha'ira basiyam. Baruch Hashem, li'ayin hara Yerushalayim is not a city that is empty. It's a city which is Kanein hara filled with Jews. Eretz Yisroel is filled with Jews. Li'ayin hara, it should continue to be so. But how is it that we sit alone? How is it that despite what we feel is the clear justness of our cause, but nevertheless we still experience that experience of Golus, of Ein lo menachem mikol haveha, because that we have no comfort that comes from anybody around us. That between those who surround us, Haise Yerushalayim l'nida beineim, it's as if we are isolated, we are apart amongst those who surround us. And as the psukim continue to express this idea, one thing which we clearly must understand and have on some level learned during this conflict is that indeed what we must do is comfort each other. That whereas we are not having comfort, where we're going to feel the isolation from those that surround us, but from each other we can feel connection, we can derive strength, and we can try, Be'ezus Hashem, to provide that comfort, provide that strength for each other, which will unify Klal Yisrael and bring us ultimately our greatest strength. Eicha yashva vadad ha'ira basiyam. Perek Beis of Eicha moves from simply the hurt of isolation to a searing pain which is over terrible, devastating destruction, and specifically as described here in this perek numerous times, including in the end, the loss of the children of the Jewish people. Yesterday in the hospital we met the head trauma surgeon of the trauma unit of the hospital, and he was talking to us about the procedures. And this is a man who looks like many surgeons look, very, very tough looking person. You would not have guessed he was a surgeon if you would have encountered him. Strong man. And he was talking to us and describing the different situations, and then he began discussing last week when an Israeli soldier was brought in a multi-casualty incident and died in his arms on the operating table. And he broke down and he was crying. And then, he turned to me, he looked at me, he says, I was already finished for the day to some degree, and I was leaving when this came in, and I took care of him in my civilian clothes. And the next day I was walking around in those clothes, and I looked down and I saw some blood on my clothes, and it all came back to me, and he was just broke down again. He said it was terrible, it was horrible. The pain of seeing day after day these soldiers, and you see them, you're all following it. These are boys of 19, 20, 21 years old, by and large the vast majority of them. That searing pain activates the Jewish people and their sense of Churban, our sense of Churban, more than anything else. As it says in this parak, Kalu badmois einai, chomarmaru meyai. My ears, my eyes have run out of tears. My insides are completely churning. Nishbach lo'oretz kevedi al shever basami. I am overwhelmed over the shever, over the break that happened to my people. Be'ateifer leil v'yonek b'rcheves kirya. As the young children are falling faint in the streets of the city, as they turn to their mothers and they say, Ayei dagon vayoyin, where do we have what to eat, what to drink? The psukim go on and speak about im teichal anoshim pirya ma'ilulei tipuchim. How could it be, how could we reach such a point where young children die? Asher tipachti v'ribisi avikilam. Those which we raised and grew, our enemy has destroyed them. At the shloshim for the three young men, for Eyal, Gilad, and Naphtali, the officer, the commander, who was in charge of the region there, of the southern Hebron region, who led the search for the three boys, he spoke. And someone I know who knows this commander well was telling me that they were very overwhelmed by how he spoke, because he was a person who's a strong army man, not an observant person, quite left-wing generally in his attitudes, and he spoke with tremendous passion. And what happened was basically what they found out was that when this person who had been involved all those days, the 18 days in the search for these children, when he discovered them, when he found those three boys, the bodies of those three boys, he simply was, broke down, as this expression of the searing pain described here in this parak of Megilas Eichah. And so the hardened soldier as well turned and ended his remarks there. And he said, Hashem oz lamo yitein, Hashem yivarecha samo v'shalom. God should give strength to his people. God should bless his people with peace. The terrible tragedy of the loss of young people, but that it should motivate us and activate us and turn us around to realize the depths of the tragedy, and therefore to be driven to turn to Hashem, to pray harder, and to work harder for each other. Eicha ya'iv ba'poes basio. As we read the third parak of Eicha, we have here a pasuk, a verse, which I think it's important for us to focus on. Sakosa be'onlon lach me'avor tefillah. One of the psukim, starting with the letter Samach, is that you protected with the cloud. You created a barrier of the cloud to prevent the tefillos, to prevent the prayers from coming through. An element of churban, an element of golus, of destruction, is the inability to be able to somehow get through with prayer. There's such a thing as Shaarei Tefillah, the gates of prayer, which could be to some degree closed. We all, in a certain sense, felt this, experienced this at first glance at least, when we were all driven to pray for those three young men, only to discover afterwards that by the time we started praying, those boys were already dead. A block something which seemed to stand in the way of our tefillos. But at the same time, of course, it opened up in us. We did daven very hard. And the effect of those tefillos, who knows where it is felt? Maybe in the tremendous amount of miracles and protection that the Jewish people have merited over these past weeks of missiles and attacks. And Hashem should make it that Be'ez Hashem, that protection should continue and only be strengthened, and we should be blessed with complete peace. But this sense of a blocking of tefillah is a factor of golus. Always experience that when coming to Eretz Yisroel. On Motzei Shabbos, well after Mariv, we went to the Kosel just to daven, not a tefillah which were mechuyev, which were obligated to daven. And we joined there hundreds of Jews from all over Yerushalayim and beyond, who do this as a matter of course, who just come to the holy places on Motzei Shabbos at other times to express themselves in tefillah. And the bit of geula that we feel here in Eretz Yisroel is so much in that we're able to daven a regular tefillah, or not even a regular tefillah, and have a feeling which rivals our feelings on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in Chutz La'aretz. The opening of the doors of tefillah. And again, in this ironically confusing time where we've suffered so much loss, but at the same time have seen things open up for us, to have the secular commander in the army, speak of Hashem Oz Lamo Yitein Hashem Yevarecha Samo Vashalom, to join all of the Jewish people in prayer. At the Shloshim for the three young men, the mother of Gilad Shair said something which was very, very profound. She said, for the generations, the Jewish people, when we davened, we always davened b'schus avos, in the merit of the fathers, of the forefathers. We started Shemona Esrei, Elokeinu v'Elokei Avoseinu, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak v'Elokei Yaakov. But in this period, the Jewish people are davening in the merit of the children, in the schus of the banim, in the merit of those three boys who opened up the reservoirs of tefillah, of prayer from the hearts of the Jewish people, the prayers for all the young men, all the young boys fighting for Klal Yisrael, for Eretz Yisroel. Golus is a sense of a closed door before the tefillah. Geula is when to some degree we feel that opening to the Shamayim, that opening to the heavens, and the ability to pray again and to get through. Perek Daled in Eichah, the pasuk describes Yidei Nashim Rachmaniyos Bishlu Yaldein, the hands of merciful mothers, Bishlu Yaldein Leilenu, cooked their children, a fulfillment of the Teichacha, of the worst warnings that are found in the Torah of tragedy that could befall the Jewish people. Tomorrow, for the Kinos, we're going to be focusing on the struggles and the challenges of Russian Jewry over the past couple of 100 years. And in studying about this era, I came across a letter from the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim wrote many letters activating the Jewish people's support for the situation of the Jews in Russia. And in a couple of the letters, he actually used a chazal, a medrash, which is found in this 4th chapter of Megilas Eichah, on this verse of Yidei Nashim Rachmaniyos Bishlu Yaldein. The medrash says as follows: Rav Huna b'shem Rav Yosi Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lo Yimnichu Oisi Lifshoit Yadi Ba'olami. The Jewish people did not allow me to extend my hand against my world. They did something which stood in the way of me being able to destroy the Jewish people. Keitzad, how's that? One of them had a single loaf of bread. The piece of bread was enough to allow her family to be fed for one day. V'kivan shebeis b'no shel shchenta, but when her neighbor's child died, she would take that kikor, she would take that bread, and do use it as the sudas havra, to comfort, a meal of comfort, of consolation to her neighbor, to her friend. She said she needs it more than I. And so the pasuk considers it kilu bishli aldein. That's the idea, so to speak, as if they cooked their children. This was the idea that they were sharing, literally, their last meals with others to provide them with comfort. And the Chavetz Chaim wrote in his letter encouraging people to support their brethren in Russia. And you have to understand, this is a letter which was written in the 1920s, when it was after the First World War, when Jews all over Eastern Europe were starving and were hungry. But the situation in Russia was even more intense. And the Chavetz Chaim was calling upon people to do what they could to send money and food to the Jews in Russia. And he drew this comparison to this situation where everybody was suffering for hunger, but these newly bereaved parents were suffering that much more. And he says, "V'kama nifloim hadvorim al midas harachmaniyos shel rachmanim b'nei rachmanim." How amazing are these words on the characteristic of mercy of the Rachmanim b'nei Rachmanim, the Jewish people who are called the merciful ones, descendants of merciful ones. B'mei hachurban v'harav, in these days of destruction and famine, asher kamtzu pisat lechem mi'aldeim. They held back even a portion of bread from their children to give it to others, l'nachem l'oidei datufei rav, to comfort and to strengthen those who were taken over by hunger and famine. It was for them a tremendous merit, and so to speak, Hashem said, it tied his hands, so to speak, that he couldn't bring the destruction that he would have otherwise brought upon the Jewish people, because he saw that Rachmanis. As I mentioned, just seeing the level of compassion, it's a difficult time for almost everybody in Eretz Yisroel. Everyone is worrying about sirens and missiles falling in most places. Almost everyone has someone out there on the battlefield. But people are turning and concerning themselves with others, davening for each other, visiting, bringing the level, the outpouring of support and gifts and love. I took a picture yesterday in the hospital of some signs in the hallway. One sign in the hallway was telling of the families that you should know if you need to just have a place to go to freshen up, to rest. There are all kinds of hotels and homes in the area that are available for you. Just call this number. Services, you need to have, want to have a massage, a haircut, all kinds of things that just an outpouring, and seeing children come through to visit and to take care. It's a tremendous zechus, a tremendous merit for the Jewish people that in all of this difficulty, to stand together and to do things for each other. The mayor of Sderot, Alon Davidi, a very fine, from young man, he said that when the three young men were abducted and the Israelis were about to pull out all the stops and going through house to house, through the areas there in Hebron, and taking all kinds of prisoners who had been released. So Sderot, which is almost constantly under fire on one level or another, they were told about what was about to happen, and they said, we're likely going to begin a big assault. Are you ready? Because likely that will trigger a new rain of rockets from Gaza, which of course has triggered this war, one might say. And he and the leadership and the people of Sderot said, the leadership on behalf of the people of Sderot said, we are ready to absorb all those rockets. Just go and get those three boys back. That's the zechus, that's the merit of Klal Yisrael. And that stops. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu will say, Lahinichu aisi lifshut yadi ba'ilami. They restrain me, that I can't strike out against a world like that, against the people like that. They're ready to deprive themselves in an already difficult situation just to comfort and to strengthen each other. The fifth and the final perakim of Eichah. Zachar Hashem ahayolanu habitu reyes cherposeinu. Hashem, remember what we had, and gaze and see cherposeinu, see our shame. We have suffered losses that we must mourn. As the Ramban writes, when things are right, when the Jewish people fight a battle, fight a milchemes mitzvah, lo yipol misaras roisham arza, not a hair from their heads should fall to the ground. Were things right, were things the way they ought to be, we would not be mourning the loss of so many of our young people, so many soldiers. Were things right, we would not be having so many of our communities struggling in fear, worrying about the next siren, about the next missile strike. With all the strength of this time, we recognize cherposeinu, we recognize our shame, we recognize our isolation, we recognize the losses, the wounded, the many korbanos that we have suffered, and the fact that we are still so far away from what could be called the Geula Shalema, the complete redemption. So we have to turn both to each other and to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As we end the Megillah, we say, Lama lanetzach tishkachenu tazveinu le'erech yamim. Why, Hashem, should you forget us, apparently forever? Tazveinu, abandon us le'erech yamim for so long. Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuva. Hashem, return us to you, so that we can return, we can be back. Chadesh Yomeinu Kikedem, renew our days like the days of old. We must continue to turn to each other. Nobody wants this feeling to end. This feeling, this kef, this joy, which the Jewish people are experiencing in this time of trial, where all the differences and divisions are really in the background, and what's in the foreground is Avas Yisrael, the love of Jews feeling for each other, committed to each other. Be'ezus Hashem, this war will end very soon in the best way. We must not allow this feeling to pass. We must have that commitment to look out for each other, to reach towards each other, from the little steps to the big steps, to make sure that we're saying to each other, to our fellow members of Klal Yisrael, without the ifs, ands, or buts, that we love you, that we care for you, that we have interest in you. And Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuva. And we must turn upward, we must turn heavenward, towards the Ravina Shalom. Not just to be the non-atheist when we're in the foxhole, but to use the bursting open of the doors of Tefillah, the removal of the cloud that separates the earth from the heavens, that has come through these difficult and sometimes tragic times, and to really open the doors to a connection to Shamayim, which ultimately will develop into the Geula Shlema, to the complete redemption. So may it be. B'mheira b'yamiנו.